Caught in the crossfire of growing sectarian violence in the Central African Republic. Civilians are living in fear of abuse, attack and atrocities, but is enough being done to protect them? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to Inside Story. I'm Stephen Cole, rich in gold and diamonds, but mired in crisis and violence, which means few share the wealth. In a region scarred by conflict and instability, the Central African Republic is being shaken by yet more violence, pitting mostly Muslim fighters who've controlled the country since March against Christians who support the ousted president. The growing sectarian unrest has prompted France's Foreign Minister Laurent Fabius to warn the Central African Republic is on the verge of a genocide. The latest outbreak of violence comes as the UN Security Council discusses increased military action by African Union and French troops. Their mandate? To protect civilians and restore security and public order. But will that be enough to pull the country back from the brink of anarchy? To our discussion in a moment. But first, Nazanin Moshiri is in the capital Bangui with more on the latest developments.
Well, this is some of the worst fighting this city has seen. The streets are practically deserted. There are just convoys of fighters. These men are Seleka forces, which are basically patrolling the city. We are opposite a base here, and we have seen some African forces from Chad in particular who are just stationed here at the moment, but people are just staying in their homes. Now we understand, and this is from the French military, that it is anti-Balaka who are behind the attacks which have been taking place. Now they are basically a Christian militia who have been coming out and they say protecting civilians against Seleka attacks around the country. But until now it was believed that anti-Balaka was basically just a protection unit, not well armed at all. But it does seem that they are capable of carrying attacks out here in this city. Now this comes of course at the same time as what we're expecting is the voting or the possible passing of a second United Nations Security Council resolution which will beef up not only French forces which are here but also African forces, because at the moment here in Bangui and outside Bangui there is no protection for civilians.
On that note, let's bring in our guests in Barcelona. Chisco Villalonga, Deputy Programme Manager for Doctors Without Borders. Joining us on Skype from Dakar in Senegal is Simon Handy, former visiting fellow at the European Union Institute for Security Studies and a Central African Republic specialist. And from Washington, D.C., we have Nia Akawida, the founder of the Democracy and Conflict Research Institute and former Executive Director of Africa Action. Let's begin with Chisco Villalonga of MSF. You just heard our reporter, I hope you did, say no protection for civilians. How would you describe the humanitarian threat to people living in the Central African Republic, considering, as you know, French politicians are already talking about a possible genocide?
Hello, good morning. Basically, when we are talking about the humanitarian situation of the population in Central African Republic, regardless of whatever resolution of the Security Council or any kind of intervention may happen, what we can describe now as the situation of the population is a crisis situation added on a very bad situation before the current phase that we are facing. Since November 2012, the conflict erupted again in the country with the Seleka until they took power in March. But this was just the continuation of a previous situation that was very deteriorated. Before all this new cycle of violence that is happening, we were already talking, and Doctors Without Borders was witnessing and denouncing for the previous 2 years at least, a situation where the mortality rates of the population were very high. since December 2012, the situation has just worsened because of this new cycle of conflict and violence that is affecting directly the population, because they are being direct victims of this violence, and we have been treating war-wounded people, but also indirectly because this is provoking, this is having consequences as displacement of people and impairing even more the very poor access to health care that the people they had even before this last cycle of crisis.
We'll come back to that poor access to health care in a moment, but I want to go to Ni Akuketa. Tell us more, Ni, about the background of the Central African Republic. Does the country have a history of instability, seeing as it's bordered by 7 other countries?
That is quite correct, and thanks for having me on the program. I think you put it very well. It's had a cycle of instability and serial coups. Even when it had a stable government, you know, they were never democratic, and there is one coup after another. And you are right that it is in a very unstable area of the continent. It's bordered by other countries that have had crises of their own. But what I will add is that probably, you know, even if it was in a stable area, internally, Central African Republic itself has had problems. So it's not that the problems came from the outside. Now, the other issue that concerns me, given my focus and where I live and what I do for my work, is to look at the international role. And I have to tell you, number one, right now we are seeing the role of Chad, which we have to look at carefully, but we even the role of France. At this moment, France is playing what I think is a good role in taking the case to the Security Council and sounding the alarm. But we must remember that earlier this year, in February and March, when the Seleka and President Jotodia were fighting to replace Mr. Bozize, France refused to intervene and sat it on its hand and let the war escalate. There is also what we have to also ask about the role of the U.S. Now, it is in the background, but the United States has been encouraging a hunt for Joseph Kony, who is Ugandan. He's been chased into Congo and Sudan, and we know that he is now in the Central African Republic. So all of that raises questions for me.
Let's go to Simon Handy before we talk about some of those, or try and answer some of those questions that Ni rightly asked. The French government is warning about what it describes as a toxic mix of terrorist groups vying to consolidate their grip on the Central African Republic. How accurate is that description?
The crisis is extremely serious. And I think for myself and others who are working on CAR and trying to get a sense of what's going on, the most important thing is how do we address it and address it effectively to move the country forward. The country is finally getting some attention on the international stage, and we must seize upon that window of opportunity to alter the course of events which threaten to engulf the stability of the region.
I understand what Simon was trying to say there, and just to reinforce perhaps his point and Ni's point as well, is the Central African Republic has very definitely a violent past. But this latest crisis stems from a mainly Muslim rebellion by an alliance of fighters known as the Seleka. They overthrew President Francois Bozize in March and installed their commander, Michel Jotodia, as interim leader. But Jotodia has struggled to control the Seleka. Now, the Seleka are former rebels who are accused of rampant violence, murder, rape and looting. Fighting back now is a group of mainly Christian defence groups called Anti-Balaka, which means anti-sword or anti-machete. They're said to be vigilantes and fighters loyal to the ousted president, but they too have been blamed for some attacks against Muslim civilians and also for being involved in some of the latest gun battles. Ni, let's come back to you and talk to you now about the Central African Republic. There are, I'm reliably informed, 80 different ethnic groups, a mixture of Christians, a mixture of Muslims and followers of various indigenous faiths. The country, therefore, would be difficult to control Is it possible to control it?
I think it is. Now, it's going to be difficult, but it is doable. It's not impossible. But first, of course, I mean, in all of this chaos and this dire situation, I am seeing, you know, little rays of hope, in the sense that it seems to me there is a clear strategy for bringing the country under control, which is that, yes, the UN and the Security Council needs to pay attention, and they seem to be doing so now. France seems to be playing a good role. But the African Union also, I think, needs to ramp up its presence with the troops and step on the stage with the Security Council. Because, Stephen, I think the way to bring security to the country is first to establish a strong security situation, and then you can bring in different people. Now, the country cannot be run on the basis of religion. It has to be run on the basis of democracy. Now, I know that we are a very long way from what most people listening to us will see as democracy. But first, you have to take the first step by taking control and making sure that both of these militias, the anti-Baleka and the Seleka, that they are controlled and they are suppressed by a strong international force that will then help the country build its own security force.
Let's go to Chisco. Chisco, the latest figures are incredibly worrying. 500,000 people, they believe, have been made homeless. Many are living in the bush. There are reports of murder, rape, considerable looting, and a quarter of the country's 4.6 million people have been made homeless. How difficult is it for an aid organisation such as yours, or even other aid organisations, to operate in such an atmosphere?
Yeah, it's quite difficult, in the sense of the lack of security in most of the country. Actually, at the same time, we are managing to deploy our interventions throughout the country. When the crisis started end of last year, we were having 6 regular projects, and since then we have scaled up the number of regular projects, the number of we have launched a number of emergency interventions, and we have increased the number of outreach activities in our structural projects, because of 2 reasons. One is the emergency situation, the increase of the needs of the population, but on the other hand also because there has been withdrawn of the already poor international response and international support to the population of Central African Republic. So that means that basically we are talking currently of a context where security is very difficult, makes very difficult the access to the population, especially because most of them, they are in rural areas, scattered, so not easy to access in centralized points in main towns. And the security situation is making it more difficult. But at the same time, we are managing, and the problem is that we have ring the bells in that sense some months ago, that there's a need of an increase of other actors, other NGOs, UN agencies, to deploy their teams beyond the main towns in order to assist those populations. 400,000 displaced people since the crisis started, and more than 1.5 million of people under a situation of food insecurity, just to give very basic figures or indicators of how severe the situation is for a population of less than 5 million people. So UN agencies have just recently started to move out of Bangui, but the big challenge remains of accessing that population that is in those scattered rural areas, and that means putting in place outreach strategies to provide all the services, health included, to all these people, in a moment that at the same time the conflict is still ongoing, and what we are seeing is a certain trend of this violence, this conflict having a certain sectarian profile.
Oh, well, that's a very key point, which I want to put to Nii, because some people now are talking, Nii, about a civil war, a religious civil war, Muslim v. Christian, and that is being blamed on the arrival of Islamist groups from Chad, Mali, Nigeria, combined with local religious militia. Is that an accurate description of what is going on?
Stephen, I have a big question about that, and I am alarmed by that, because we must emphasize that independent Central African Republic has known very little peace. So we cannot say that this religious caste is what is creating the problem. They have had problems before. But I think casting it as a religious war, a sectarian war, just worries me. Also, when I hear the word genocide, you know, we are in the region where there was a genocide in Rwanda. And in Eastern Congo, we've had over millions of people killed. But I think the word genocide should not be used carelessly. And therefore, I think you ask a great question, and I'm asking the same question myself. I mean, it is worrying, but is it accurate? Is it a religious war? As bad as things have been, if it becomes a religious war, I think it will be much worse. So I think, number one, everything has to be done to make sure that security is established by legitimate forces. For now, those will be the international forces. But the other thing is semantic and how we think about it and how we talk about it. We must not call it genocide if it is not, and everything must be done to make sure that it's not seen as a religious war, because there are all kinds of factors thrown in. As we said, there are almost 20 ethnic groups. So some of the fighting may have ethnic caste. So let's not rush into calling it a sectarian, because I think that will make it worse.
I understand your point, and nobody here is rushing, but I want to go to Simon Handy. We're talking, Simon, as you heard, about what is being described as a potential religious civil war because of outside Islamist groups coming in to the Central African Republic. Nii doesn't believe that's necessarily true. What do you think?
Yeah, what I believe is that there are empirical evidence on the ground to show that in the aftermath of the Seleka onslaught, there were massive influx of irregular forces in the country, you know, with with Muslim dominations that have been roaming and committing appalling acts of carnage that are contrary to our common humanity. And then as a result, there has been, effort by some group to gather and then to resist that. But overall, I believe, other people said, that this is hype and then overly manufactured, but it could escalate into a serious sectarian all-out war, and it should not be neglected. And I think that a semantic fight over whether this is genocides or not is not the appropriate way to go about it, but to look at all these elements that are taking shape. And there are, as you know, this morning, for the first time in months in Bangui, there were all-out, confrontation between religious groups.
Aid groups are also warning of a possible humanitarian disaster in the CAR. The UN says the country is facing a crisis that affects the entire population of 4.5 million people. An estimated 400,000 people have fled their homes since the spring. They're living in crowded and dirty camps. The UN's Deputy Secretary General has warned that 1 in 3 people are in need of food, protection, healthcare, clean water, sanitation and shelter. Well, Chisco Villalonga, that's quite a long list, isn't it? Not just for your organisation, but for UNESCO and other humanitarian organisations. If this develops into a religious, a sectarian divide, that must make your job more difficult?
Actually, what we are seeing is that there are other grounds for the conflict that is happening. The country has been trapped for many years in a situation between lack of development and recurrent humanitarian crises related to outbreaks, nutritional crisis, lack of basic health services, etc. From a medical point of view, especially.
Why is that?
So that's not not there has been an absolute, I would say, or almost absolute neglect by the international community towards Central African Republic.
Is it the job? Is it the job of the international community, or is it the job of the people running the Central African Republic?
It's a combination of both.
Because this is the key point, isn't it? About outside interference,
yeah,
possibly. I mean, Chisco and Ni, a lack of development, which is blamed for the poor levels of healthcare that Chisco was mentioning. There are vast deposits of gold, diamonds, uranium, vast troves of timber, huge wealth. Where's it all gone? It certainly hasn't gone to the people. It hasn't gone into development of healthcare services.
I think that question is very much on point. And I mean, in Washington here, we talk that if you scratch most African conflicts below the surface, there are a lot of different factors, but almost always the factor of the fight over resources is there. Sometimes it is the fight is internal, but even when it appears to be internal, you get an international connection, because all these resources are not, they are being taken out of the country, they are being taken internationally to different countries and to the outside world. So frequently, what should be a blessing for an African country, the wealth that the CAR has, that should be the blessing for its people, actually becomes a curse because... Yes, it should be, but it doesn't happen that way, and I think that is because of weak government and lack of democracy. And
is it lack of democracy, or is it greed?
I actually think it is both, because, you know, I mean, greed drives the people not wanting to have democracy, which essentially means everybody is equal and included. Now, it's a difficult journey, but that's the direction. Now, international powers play a very devious role by imposing and supporting dictators who will allow them quick access